rolling.
Okay. Trying to think about my introduction here.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Susie Appleby. I'm the administrative assistant at the Highlands Ranch Mansion. And I guess you could say I'm kind of the on-property historian here, but whenever I have a question or I get stumped by some information that I need, I turn to this man right here. This is Jeff Case. He's the director of Public Works at the Highlands Ranch Metro District. And Jeff also became the project manager of the renovation of the Highlands Ranch Mansion when it was given to the Metro District by Shea Homes in the year 2010, right? Is that when
That's correct.
That's when it started. And you went 2010 to 2012, right? Renovation?
Right.
And Jeff is here today to show us some of the areas that got a lot of the renovation, talk about some of the construction history of the mansion, and we are just going to let him go for it.
Okay. Well, thanks, Susie. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the legacy that you brought to this project.
Thank you.
I guess as a matter of introduction, I mean, I've worked in Highlands Ranch since 1981, since the project began. So my relationship with this building has been 35 years. And over the years, we did look at several opportunities within the community to do the renovation or find a use for this building. And we were lucky enough that in 2009, 2010, Shea Homes and the Highlands Ranch Metro District were able to develop a plan that allowed us to receive this building for the intent of community use, while also providing an opportunity for private events to help fund the operations and maintenance of it. Because as much as we all love historic structures, the experience across the nation is that funding is never as readily available as many people think, and therefore, we looked at this as a great opportunity. And as we approached the renovation of the building, we took it that way, that we wanted to respect the history, the heritage of this building, the structure of the ranch, and provide an opportunity, educational opportunity for many people to experience this, but also make it a desirable venue so that we could have community events, private events, celebrations, and if you will, bring the community together in a very special way, because there is no other structure like this in Colorado. So I'm going to start the tour a little bit, and I'm going to ask Susie, as much as she's an instrumental part of all of what we commemorate here, I'm going to have her kind of move over so I don't kind of swing my arm and hit her in the face.
Go over here where it's safe.
And then we end up on YouTube. So we're going to start at the front door, the front door that most people remember. Even though the mansion was not open to the public before 2012, there were opportunities at times when the developer Mission View Company, who originally owned the mansion and then subsequently Shea Homes, had community events up here. So there were parts of the house that people were able to experience. It wasn't furnished. It didn't have a lot of modern conveniences. Didn't have indoor plumbing that worked. But there are things that were very memorable to people. So, and probably one of the most memorable is this front door here, and it, it's a beautiful facility. It's classic in its design. But it's also interesting that this was not the front door of the mansion when the mansion was originally constructed. This actually was a turret that, and we'll refer in a bit here to a photo that, thank goodness we found a photo from around 1910 when John Springer owned the building and the ranch, and we'll make some references to that. And so that'll be something that we'll be doing here in a bit. The first part of the house and the first entrance to this building actually brings us around the corner here. This modest entrance was the actual first first way that the owners of the ranch came into the house here. As being an engineer, but also a bit of a history buff, we looked for clues throughout as to try to find out how best to define this building, because there's very little written record about the mansion. I mean, there are newspaper articles and there are a few photos that obviously were taken, a few with John Springer, several more with Frank Kistler, and then a few later with the Phipps family. But there's really not a lot that we've been able to determine. But luckily, this building was purely a 100-year-old renovation project. Each owner, as they acquired the property, expanded it, improved it in the way that they felt was appropriate for the time and appropriate for the use. And in doing so, as we could see visual clues in what we see in the building right now, and then also as we kind of broke open parts of the building, we discovered a lot in there also. Actually, the very first structure that occupied this space and ultimately became the mansion that we are visiting today, and ultimately the Highlands Ranch property was actually built by Samuel Long, who emigrated here from Pennsylvania in the early 1890s, and then built this building here around 1891. And the home was a very simple one-story with a peaked roof, and we have one image that we can share with you later about that. And but we didn't really have any evidence that Samuel Long owned this. All the records we had indicated that John Springer was the original builder, if you will, of a structure here. And when we were doing the renovation, this porch that exists here now, of course, was not a porch that existed even back before probably 1940. And this porch was added during the Kistler era. But and while we were doing some renovation with this porch, and we had to rebuild this porch, we discovered that there was an inscription carved into the top of the porch at the time. The porch, actually, the way it was built, was covering it up totally. And while we were doing some removal, we discovered some chiseling in the rock, and then a little further. And at the time, this porch was full all the way across. And then we removed a portion of it, and it discovered that there's a name in there, Rotherwood. And the name Rotherwood didn't mean anything to us either. But luckily, we had some great individuals that did some research and discovered that Rotherwood was actually the name of a farm back in western Pennsylvania. That was the boyhood farm of Samuel Long. And we did have property records that indicated that Samuel Long owned land out here. We just didn't believe that there was a structure. So Rotherwood, Samuel Long, same property, same home, and our first owner was revealed to us.
And also, Jeff, the 1891 carved
Right,
up there at
that's
the
right.
top of the window,
Exactly.
is that a clue too?
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, yeah, that was a confirmation. That's right. The other thing that we discovered was there is a keystone above here that many people have seen over the years. That is 1891, and that had led quite a few people to believe that that actually John Springer had appeared here in 1891. But a reading of the history knew that he wasn't even in Colorado till late 1890s, 1896, and therefore that was not a possibility. But Samuel Long was here in 1891. Suddenly we started to have some pieces pulled together here, and the 1891 had significance to us, and it was etched in stone already. So it became, if you will, the first. The first resident of the ranch headquarters here. There were other properties that were owned around the land that's currently Highlands Ranch. This was the doorway that was constructed, and the building was a simple single story with a pitched roof made out of stone. And as we went inside, as we started to understand that a little more, we could start to see some clues as to how that first house existed. And we saw a few things initially, and as the renovation went along, we discovered more and more. We also, you will see throughout the building as we walk, mostly on the exterior, that the clues also are in the type of materials that were used. The building is primarily stone of various types, with, of course, wood in certain areas. But throughout there, we see the types of stone vary quite a bit. And here you see a very dense kind of what we almost call it's a field stone, but we almost call it an ironstone. As you transition over in here, you see wood or a much different material, quarried rock, which initially we had thought was rhyolite, but as it turns out, it's actually a material called Turkey Creek sandstone, which came from an area around Pueblo. And this here, we know of when this material was used, and this became very clearly part of the renovation and expansion that was done by Frank Kisler. And so as we went through the building, and you'll see more and more, there are different types of stone, more than this, and even patterns in the way that the mortar was done, and the way that the structure was kind of put together. You physically can see a map of how the house was expanded, sometimes brought down, sometimes added on to by the various owners. Why didn't they use the same material? Partially because they probably wanted to be distinctive. It may have been more difficult to get material. We know the sandstone actually was only available for a few decades, and then the quarry closed down. But it's been a great blessing for us because it really helps us understand more about how this building evolved.
So Jeff, myself and a lot of the volunteers were often asked, why was this door not centered right under those carvings and under that keystone that says 1891? Do we have any ideas for that?
I'll be honest with you, I have not found any evidence or anything that leads to it. Maybe poor eyesight, but probably not. It's hard to know. We know definitely from the top of the doorway that that was the original. I mean, sometimes these doors were shifted a little bit here or there. Why it was not, it's hard to say. One thing that I'm not sure about is whether the 1891 is centered on between the two walls, and for some reason, unbeknownst to us, that the doorway was shifted a little bit for reasons of convenience, and they felt that the 1891 was more important to them than the doorway.
Okay.
But that's an interesting observation.
And do we have any measurements on this house? The Long's house?
We can and we should, but I don't know what
You're
they're
actually
offhand.
stop for a second.
Do they have? Oh, Jeff, do we have any idea of the measurements of Long's house?
The house, from what we can tell from the measurements with the existing stone that is currently still in the building, it was about 30 feet wide and around 50 feet long. And the image that we saw, and we'll see clues in the back of the house, show that it was a single story with a staircase that actually was in the back, and the roof was a shingled roof, a pitched roof, with essentially bedrooms upstairs, within that, what would be known as now an attic. And, but it was just single story, very little below. The foundation was stone also, though the entire thing was made of stone, which was readily available all around us here. Even though lumber there were a lot of big lumber mills. I think it's cheaper to just take what's on the ground around you.
Right. Okay, can we go in the house?
So here we are inside the entrance that was originally constructed by Samuel Long, and as we said, the house was originally about 30 feet wide, and the east side of the house we have remnants of the wall here that we can show you when we walk in to the behind me here. The west wall no longer exists. The west wall actually existed right about here. If you remember, I pointed to the rock and the differences in the rock. in that corner, the wall kind of came in here. This whole space was added by John Springer when he did the expansion, and as I talked about at the very beginning, this actually was not a doorway. John Springer used this doorway and then eventually another doorway in what we know as the living room. And this was essentially probably a study or something. Ultimately, the staircase went up, but even that wasn't one of the original additions that was done by John Springer. The staircase actually went up to the back. So let's go ahead and move into the other part of the house. Although actually, I just realized, I think I want to talk about a little bit about why we are moving this way, and when we move to the house, we now have a long hallway. So why do we now, as we move to the house, walk through this portal, through this entry here, and move to the back? If that wasn't originally how those who lived here moved through here. And the reason for that is, as I talked about at the beginning, this building is for public use. It's for celebration. It's to embrace and to welcome everyone, into the house. And in order to do that, we needed to have a good way of allowing people to move through the house. The only ways into the house, when we obtained ownership of it, and probably existed for, my goodness, at least 50, 60 years, was through this little doorway here, which goes through a tiny little hallway, little closet off to the side for some utilities, and then opens up into the butler's pantry. And that was the only way you could move into the back of the house, unless you went down the steps through the living room and then up into the dining room and then back around, which wasn't a very good approach for trying to get in there. So we started to move into this space over here. And I think what we will be doing is we're going to be walking through the east side of the house. And the east side of the house had a lot of renovation done to it, mainly because of the condition of it, but also because it provided us the best opportunity to take and kind of create a grand entrance and to allow people to move into the house and access the various elements to the house itself. So as we move through this part of the house here, this was known at one time as essentially the office or the library during the Lawrence Phipps ownership. And there's some interesting elements to this house, to this part of the house. What we do have here is this large, heavy wall. It was actually the east side of the house that Samuel Long built, and the building ended here. This spanned across here. At some point, not when the Phipps family owned it, but probably during the Hughes era, and or possibly the Kissel era. There's a lot of time periods here that we're not positive of. We'd love to find somebody that had a camera that actually used it, but this part of the house was added to the building. And what we found interesting, and we found evidence of this as we moved to the house, is we found evidence of this exterior wall on the east as we started to do some of the demolition. As I said, this was not a way to get through the house. This was just a single room that kind of continued over here. What is original or period of this room, though, is the photograph that's at the very end of the hallway here. And this was a photograph that was taken when Life magazine did an article on the Arapaho Hunt Club back in 1949, and it was a feature article that was that had talked about the Hunt Club and was Life magazine was a lifestyle magazine, and so it picked up on that. And this image that you see there is actually an image that was taken for that article, and as far as we know, has been up on the wall since probably somewhere in that time period. I mean, the article was probably written in either late 48 or early 49. And so as part of this, we kept the photograph here. This room itself used to have a doorway, a fairly modern doorway. It was a sliding glass door. Not too many sliding glass doors in the early 1900s. And it went into a tiny little courtyard that existed that was surrounded on all sides by stone wall. And that was always a bit perplexing for us to understand why it existed the way it did. And we're not really sure why it was never filled in, but it did kind of create a nice little, if you want to call it a nice little private garden space or something for whoever lived here at the time.
Do we have any idea who built that courtyard? Any clues on that? Or just another one of those unknowns?
I was trying to think of periods here. Probably. I was going to attribute it to Kistler, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Because I think it was actually boxed in before then.
Okay.
We're going to, as we walk through the house and we move through here, we'll talk a little bit about some of the discoveries we made. And one of the things that kind of confirmed, we had no idea that there wasn't a small home that was the original structure on this building, and actually became sort of the seed that it grew into this massive manor house. But as we started to do some renovation work in here, because as I said, this part of the building needed a lot more work than the west side of the building, we discovered exterior windows that were covered up. We found actually some other, we had an existing bathroom over there, and then we actually even discovered a small basement root cellar that was roughly about 20 feet by 15 feet that was accessed from the bottom of a closet. Probably if you want to call it the most iconic historical image we have of the Highlands Ranch Mansion is an image that was taken in 1910 during the ownership of John Springer. And what's interesting about the image is that there's so many things happening. There's so many clues that we used when we were trying to understand the progression of the house itself. And also, kind of a little fun fact is the fact that on the east side of the house you can see horses, and which of course was so important to John Springer in his interest and his business interest. And then on the far right side you can see an automobile, and which certainly had been around for perhaps a decade, but were still quite the oddity, in the West. The house itself essentially extends from the area about where I'm standing on the east side of the library, as we're calling it at the moment, and goes all the way to the west end of the living room. And at that point it ends. There is no other extension to the west. And if you look at the house itself, the advantage of the light is that the time of day presented that we were getting light from the back of the house, and you can actually see through the house. You can see windows going through the living room. And what that tells us is it gave us a clue, and then we found a lot of confirmation, is that the house during John Springer's ownership only went as far back, if you will, from north to south, to the south wall of the living room itself. There was no dining room. There certainly was no what we call the modern library or billiard room, and the room that is now called the solarium certainly did not exist. And you can even see on the upper level that there's a bedroom, which is considered the master bedroom for, and behind that you can see a window, and that also tells us that the hallway, nothing existed beyond that. And the front of the house, the turret, if you will, which is now the grand entrance front door, was a window. And even if you start to look more at the clues, you can see that while the roof line changed when Frank Kistler came in and put in a pitched roof instead of the flat roof that gave you more of a castle look. If you look at the top of the turret, actually the top of it is also different. And once again, it was probably changed by Frank Kistler. Other connections to the modern mansion and this mansion that's over 100 years old is the existence of a doorway in the center of the living room. And that doorway was actually accessed through an elevated porch, if you will, patio that existed right in front of the mansion, which still exists, but it's in a very different form. And that doorway is now a window. And if you look at the elevation of the porch on the outside of the house, on the front, and the elevation of the living room, which certainly has not changed, you can see that the front porch or patio was considerably lower than the modern one that we have now. The doorway that you see that was used, by by Springer, was the formal entrance, if you will, to the house. As you moved over to the east, the wood porch that exists, that is over the entrance that was built by Long, is now just a canvas or a wooden type of porch that was put on there. And then you'll notice a lot of stone that exists across the front of the porch, and then a little further down, approximately probably 20 to 30 feet further north. And that wall probably functioned as much as a barrier for cattle and livestock from getting right up next to the house. And that was very common back then to have stone walls. And if you'll notice, there's not even a gate per se. There's a little step where you would step up and then step back down over the wall. And of course, that was to prevent livestock from getting too close to the structure itself. While that wall doesn't exist anymore, I think it probably does exist in the stone wall that surrounds the front lawn and was established as the perimeter when Frank Kistler did the expansion. And once again, I believe that the owners took material when they did expansions or renovations and reused it. And so when that was demolished and a much more formal manor house was created, all that stone was then just carried over and reused as part of the perimeter wall that has that goes up about 3 to 4 feet and then has an wrought iron fence that rims the property itself. There also is evidence of what we call the bowling alley. Well, what is the bowling alley? Did exist back in 1910, and the entrance into the to get in close to the house for obviously for carriages and stuff for deliveries came through an archway which currently is part of what houses the servants' quarters above it. And that led you to the back of the house where the carriage house exists, and the carriage house probably did exist during the Springer era because, of course, one of his passions and one of his business interests was a carriage company and raising horses, and a carriage was every bit as valuable, probably more valuable than an automobile in today's world, and those were to be protected whenever possible, whether it be with a wooden barn or with a stone structure. As we talked about, we did do renovations in this, and we actually removed the facing that was up on the wall in here and kind of reconfigured it when we put in the hallway. And the other thing that we ended up making a decision to do was there was a doorway that actually existed right here that went into a small bathroom that also looked like it had an exterior entrance to it. The bathroom, you'll see remnants of it when we go into the ladies' room, and but it was kind of an odd configuration because this wall was a little further back, and the door opened, but only to a certain. It opened up to here, but only to this corner because these cabinets were built by Lawrence Phipps during his time period. Actually, probably his wife did some interior renovation in here. So it was a functioning bathroom for the family, but was kind of an odd lot, and we ended up repurposing it as part of the restroom facilities for the ladies' room.
So is the feeling that that bathroom was built by Kistler, is that something that we're thinking?
Yeah, most likely this bathroom was built by Frank Kistler, and the reason that we believe that to be the case is the fact that the fixtures that were in there were very much from that time period of the 1930s, and the coloring of it, as you'll see, we have some of the remnant tile and replica tile in there is of an Art Deco type of theme to it. So it would appear that that was added by Frank Kistler. And as I said, there's evidence of probably another entrance into it. And this could have been a bathroom that could have been maybe used by not the ranch hands, but by other people that just wanted to be able to come in and out from the outside. It didn't fit well with the other bathroom facilities that we found throughout the house. That it kind of matched the intent and use of it.
I never knew that.
I think it was probably hired staff.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you have pictures of that? Evidence of the additional doorway?
Some stuff from the outside.
Okay.
And yeah, I think it's a damn weird stucco.
Yeah.
Too. Why that ever appeared, I don't know.
Yeah. I know that was kind of strange.
It's so odd, but so we're going to start to take ourselves down the hallway here, and as I said, this part of the house received the most demolition and kind of repurpose throughout the renovation. Of course, our goal was not to preserve every element exactly as it was as we found it in let's say 1978, 79, but to capture the elements of the house that predated that, and as well as create a modern facility that had conveniences. We provided an elevator access so that people with all abilities can access the upper level, because of course that never existed before. We put in modern restrooms because, again, as we're hosting events here, and this house was always an important social kind of a magnet for the southern area, and I mean the families that lived here were all of great prominence, and while we don't have specific examples as in narratives, we know that there was a lot of parties, a lot of social events that occurred here, and so we're continuing that legacy. I mean, this community loves to be here. I mean, there are events throughout, and there's private events, and so people can celebrate their own lives here also. So as I said, when we originally looked at it, we could not continue the house through here. Therefore, what we had to do was create a path by which those that are in the house feel welcome and can come in and start to enjoy the home. There was an opening here. It was more about the size of a normal doorway, and it traveled into here. In fact, there was actually a door on it at one time. And what we did is we felt that it was important to make it wider so that it communicated very clearly, and come here, enter, and enjoy the home. And therefore we expanded this. This wall, while was not an original stone wall, became a very important wall, we found out, because certainly when Samuel Long lived here, they certainly could not have any type of a facility or of a second floor that spanned 30 feet. I mean, you just can't build that. I mean, and therefore they had to have some intermediate walls in order to support a second floor in here. And this wall was definitely one of them, and in fact probably the most critical one. And what we found is a lot of generations of framing and a little bit demolition and add-on. We found beyond this, we found evidence of a doorway that existed probably a little further over here that that must have led to well, at the time, just part of the house. Later, we believe that it probably ended up being part of the entrance for servants to get into the living room. There are images that we do have of during the ownership of Wade Phillips and John Springer, and then later Frank Kistler, that show evidence of a doorway on the, if you will, the what I would call the southeast corner of the living room. As you're facing the clock, immediately to the right, there's a doorway that no longer exists, but it sort of reflects what probably occurred by those that used this house. So as we did this, we found various generations of framing and doorways, and we also found some fairly bad carpentry. While certainly everybody wanted to make their home right, I mean, at times people took liberty with what they felt would help support the upper level. Also below us is the only basement that this building has. It's very small, very narrow, but it's underneath the original home that was built by Long, and again, it's made from stone wall, and the basement didn't span the whole 30 feet. It actually only went to about here. So that's another reason for why this wall existed where it did here, because they were able to basically span nominally about 12 to 15 feet, and then another 12 to 15 feet to help support the house. And so as we went through and we made decisions on here, we had to reinforce this floor because it was just pretty soft. And actually, while we tried to make the house as level as possible, we also had to make an adjustment in the floor here in order to match the framing below, or else we would have had to remove the entire floor, which was certainly not desirable. The stone that exists here in the turret area is a travertine, and we're fairly confident that was put in by Frank Kistler as part of his renovation and kind of dressing up the house to make it a little more of a manor. And while we could not match that exactly, we did use a travertine tile here also in order to do that. And to be honest, a little construction note is that we actually angled the tile instead of putting it in a straight pattern because the walls are kind of wobbly, and we didn't want it to be so obvious that as you went along. So when you turn things diagonally, you don't notice it as much when things are a little bit out of square. One other thing, and we're not going to touch a lot on it, but we will. This house was heated totally by radiators. There was no air conditioning, no air handling throughout the house. I mean, when it got stuffy, they opened windows when they could. But in order to heat this house, there was a large boiler that functioned actually quite well, but it was very inefficient. And when we started to deal with the fact of getting a large venue in here and getting hundreds of people, multiple times a year, summer, winter, we needed to develop a more modern heating and cooling system. So we went through and removed the radiator system and then installed a modern system that has sort of distributed heat and air conditioning. And we did use these enclosures that existed for the radiators themselves and just built that in. Here it's just within a box. At some point when we get into some of the other more formal rooms, I can talk a little bit about some of the renovations we did in there. But that involved, because we did not have a basement throughout this house, involved a lot of crawling and some pretty industrious work by some very dedicated plumbers and heating contractors.
So Jeff, you mentioned this box over here. Is that something that was original that you reused to put the modern heating system in? Is that what?
Right, exactly. Radiators existed here, and I think probably this was added during the I think it was in the 1950s or 60s when the Phipps family did some kind of modernization and added wood to kind of warm it up here. I mean, before that there was probably a radiator that just existed here by itself. There was also a radiator underneath the photograph under there that had that. And the radiators were, of course, a very modern system. Like I said, it was, over the years I would come into the house on a regular basis, and it was always quite warm in here. I think, of course, the combination of the well-run radiator system and massive stone walls helps you quite a bit on that. The radiators themselves, I mean, probably appeared during the acquisition of the property and a little bit of modernization. There wasn't a lot of work done, but a little bit of the modernization that was done by Wade Phillips. And of course, as we go through the house, you're going to see fireplaces in many, many locations, and that was obviously very important in the early, for the early owners up until the mid-20s when Phillips acquired the property. It also kind of gives us clues. If we didn't find a fireplace, that part of the house probably didn't exist prior to the 1920s. When Wade Phillips acquired the property, there was an article, because he was certainly a man of note at the time, and that he had acquired this property and that he was going to make some improvements to it, and one of those was what was known as a physical plant, and that included I believe the article made reference to a centralized heating system. So we see evidence of that. The boiler itself is actually in a building outside of this structure itself, just across the alleyway.
So that would have been sometime in the 1920s?
Yes, okay. Yeah, I believe Wade Phillips acquired it in 1926.
Yeah, 1920 to 1926 is when Wade Phillips was here. So
oh, that's right. You're right. I'm sorry.
Excuse me, sometime early to mid 1920s.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. I got that. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Early 1920s. So yeah, you're right. He acquired it after Colonel Hughes passed away. And so yeah, in the early 20s is probably when that came to be. And the boiler itself was a coal-fired boiler, and very large, and was replaced in modern years with a natural gas boiler, and which actually was still in operation. Not the original one, but when we acquired the property itself.
Any idea who put that in and what type of time period we're looking at for that?
No, I'm not sure when it was probably put in. My sense would be when it got to be a big hassle to haul coal around, right. and so you would think probably sometime in the 50s, okay. But would be my guess.
So after the coal and the boiler system, what happened as far as utilities after that?
Well, the coal-fired system probably existed. I mean, until coal became just kind of a modern inconvenience, if you will. And while we did not know this, but we've heard reports that that into the 60s, the coal furnace was still being used, and coal was still being delivered here, and operated by ranch hands and others, to support the building itself. So sometime during that time period, natural gas eventually became an option.
Okay. And then as far as, going to electricity and that type of thing, any ideas on that?
The building, when we started doing renovation of the building, we found, obviously electricity throughout the building. I mean, it's the capacities were quite limited, but we found throughout the building a type of wiring called knob and tube, and knob and tube was very popular in the teens and 20s, and somewhere after the probably around 1930, it became a more modern type of was used, but we do have some pictures of that throughout, and always whoever owned this, while this was never the primary residence for an individual, except for perhaps Samuel Long, it was it's still a building of prominence and something that they wanted to show off. So it was pretty common for the owners to do their best to get whatever was the modern convenience brought to their house as quickly as possible. So it would appear that sometime during the teens that electricity arrived in the home here. Again, for lights primarily, but certainly the conveniences. And then later, of course, as you moved into the 40s and electrification of the West, if you will, started to become much more popular, and as of course probably also as part of during the 1930s FDR's programs to kind of add jobs to the nation and modernize it.
Okay.
I may or may not have said this already, but I'm a civil engineer, and therefore I've been around water and sewer all my life pretty much, and so here I am hanging out in bathrooms. But we wanted to talk a little bit about, like we've talked about, the evolution of the house, and so as we moved through the house and we needed to find space to add certain features and conveniences, we had to, if you will, kind of break a few eggs, try some stuff, and so oftentimes we would be removing drywall that was existing, a little bit of plaster now and then, not as much plaster, we try to respect that. But we did come in and we started to access parts of the house that hadn't been seen since somebody had renovated it. This wall you see here is the east wall of the house, of the first house that was constructed by Samuel Long, and essentially where I'm standing, other than in a bathroom stall, was the small courtyard that existed, that was rimmed on all four sides by walls, and there was no way in or out except through a couple doorways. The slanting glass door that existed out of the study library area, and then there was another doorway that came out of the servants' quarters area. And this window here we've kept. And this was a window that like I said, existed on the east side of the house, the mansion that existed, and opened up into this courtyard area here. We found that several of these had iron grates across them, and we never understood why they had iron grates, since they really, I mean, they weren't protecting anybody, essentially you're trying to protect yourself from somebody in your own courtyard that had to go through your house to start with. Never made sense to us. Now as we started to uncover sort of the chronology of the house, we discovered that this was actually an exterior window at one time. So I doubt that the iron grate was really about intruders. It was probably more about, nosy horses and things like that might want to poke their nose in here. As we go through the house and we'll walk through, particularly in the eastern side, you'll see exposed walls like this on a regular basis. In fact, we'll show you a few more in here. And you can see in here also evidence of penetrations when wood was put in, for various reasons stuff. So these things were all built with, a very specific intent. And then, as renovations were done, if that intent had been, no longer was needed, oftentimes they just would cover it up, or sometimes they would just repurpose. So we're in the ladies' room, and unoccupied ladies' room, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the discovery as well as the architectural finishes that we did in this. A decision was made, as I had said earlier, that to do our best to not replicate what we found here, because there were so many different periods that in which this house was added on to, expanded. modernized, decorated. There was really no single period that made sense to capture, and therefore what we tried to do is reflect, you know, the periods that existed throughout. This room itself, as well as the men's room, carries a lot of marble, which we found throughout the house, as you'll see in some of the other restrooms. While the fixtures are not necessarily Art Deco, they're a little more representative of that type of a style. It was a rather interesting relationship that this house had, being out far from Denver, the center of a massive, one of the largest ranches in Colorado, being what many people would think would be a cowboy heaven. And when we originally started, we struggled with, were we going to make this look like the Ponderosa from the Bonanza series, or were we going to try to make it look like something from the the more modern from the Dallas TV series from the 1980s, and we took clues from the things that we found. And also, like I said, we had to do a lot of demolition in this part of the house. This was part of a courtyard, and then there was also, as we got a little further over, we actually had part of another room in here. And as we started to demolish, we found stone, which, of course, you would not build an interior wall made out of stone unless it was not an interior wall its entire life. So at one point, this was the exterior wall of the room that we were in, that where the picture is and where you come in into the entrance. And the house did not extend any further south than this. And then also what we found is while it was an interior wall all the way through here, we also found there was a gap here all the way down. And as it turns out, that there was a doorway here. So made sense. If you're going to put up a stone wall exterior, you needed to have a doorway. And that doorway went into the space that we just visited, that we often call the History Lounge now as part of our modern renovations. And if you look at the top, you'll see wood embedded in the stone. And once again, that wood was embedded in the stone. Typically, if you needed to hang some type of a roof structure or whatever over it, I mean, you wouldn't put wood inside masonry except that you needed to nail something to it. And so some of this we don't have explanations for what exactly they did here, but obviously there was a very real purpose in why they did this. The period for this, probably, this was probably existed in the late 1920s, and the bathroom that did exist and the doorway that went into the other room was probably put in during the Kistler era. And if we look over into here, I mean, this is all marble and granite. And however, if you look over to the east side of the house, what we have is a very green tile, a very distinctive colored tile. And this tile, actually, some of which, probably about 2/3 of it, is the original tile that we found in the house that probably dated from the 20s. And then because, of course, we had to demolish certain parts of it, we then had to get a replica tile made for it. And so we felt it was important. It was a little bit of a bonus space that we had, as well as the fact that we wanted to kind of, illustrate and show, a certain level of respect for what did exist. So the green and black was very, those were the colors that we found for this particular bathroom. Every bathroom has different colors. It's just an interesting little homage to the designer of this house. This was a functioning bathroom, and what we did find in here also in this courtyard was we actually found a space below this that we did not know existed. It wasn't totally hidden, but it wasn't obvious. It was in the back of a closet. There was a small doorway, and when you opened the doorway, you went down And what you found in there would be akin to a root cellar, if you will. It was a basement. It was totally excavated. It was tall enough for people to stand in. Nominally about, I think about 15 feet by maybe 12 feet. Wasn't real tall though, and it certainly wasn't anything that could have been used for any other than storage. Perhaps for vegetables, perhaps for roots. Somebody even suggested maybe it was used to store beverages during the Prohibition period. So, and it was fascinating. Unfortunately, the renovation required that we had to have a stable structure for it. So we documented what we could in there. There was nothing of real artifact value, and then we had to fill it in order to create a foundation for the new restrooms.
So that basement was underneath the floor here in the women's restroom?
It was, and it actually, yes, it actually came in through that bathroom, that green bathroom that that was there, and there was a closet, and we found that closet, and well, it existed. We opened it up and found the staircase leading down to it. Yeah, men's room, and wanted to talk a little bit about some of the elements here. Well, there are a lot of similarities to what we found in the structure, the walls of the ladies' room. We also found some different elements. The stone wall here, as you can see, this is still continuance of the east wall of the Samuel Long house, and as we And then also what we found is that that we have stone surrounding the building with some very different masonry patterns. You know, we have kind of a fat masonry here with this field stone. You look over to this other wall over there and you actually see a joint that goes vertically all the way down. And so this defines that we had two different walls that met here, that this was a point of an expansion that occurred. And you can see some wood embedded in there. That's typically there probably for a window that existed at one time, and then an opportunity existed to expand the house, and therefore that's if you're going to have to take down some wall, you might as well take it down at the point of a window, and therefore not have to worry about removing as much. So as you see throughout, you see kind of an unusual score pattern. You see a difference in the type of building materials in here. And so once again, and then you can see the archway on the ceiling there, and of course that's also symbolic of so also at this entrance and or window that went into to this space here, you can see the archway at the very top, and of course that's evidence of either a large window or a doorway that existed in here. So once again, what we had is a situation where we had the east wall. Decisions were made to expand the house, and stone was brought in. Not the exact same stone, but and the house was expanded. In this case, there was a courtyard in here, and then the stone that you see along the wall adjacent to the mirrors was actually a north wall for a portion of the house that housed the servants' quarters, as well as the kind of an eating area for the servants that existed